Thomas, where it was written, if you bring forth what's within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. This is the parable of the bad tenants, or the wicked husbandmen. It's got all kinds of different things you could call it. It's a story that Jesus told, and it goes like this. There was once a man, a wealthy farmer, who planted a vineyard. He fenced it, he dug a wine press, he put up a watchtower, and then he turned it over to the farmhands, and he went off on a trip. When it was time to harvest the grapes, he sent his servants back to collect his profits. But the farmhands grabbed the first servant, and they beat him up. And the next one they murdered. They threw stones at the third, but he got away. The owner tried again, sending more servants. But they got the same treatment. The owner was at the end of his rope. And so he decided to send his son. Surely, he thought, they'll respect my son. But when the farmhands saw the son arrive, they rubbed their hands in greed. This is the heir, they said. Let's kill him and have it all for ourselves. So they grabbed him and they threw him out and they killed him. Now, when the owner of the vineyard arrives home from this trip, what do you think he'll do to the farmhands? Well, he'll kill them. A rotten bunch and good riddance, they answered. And then he'll assign the vineyard to farmhands who will hand over the profits when it's time. Didn't you ever read this in the scriptures? Jesus asked. The stone that the builders rejected has now become the cornerstone. And this is the Lord's doing, and it's wonderful to see. I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and will be given to those who live it instead of just talk about it. And anybody who stumbles over that stone will be broken to pieces, and it will crush anyone that it falls on. In Matthew's commentary after this, he tells us that when the religious leaders heard this story, they knew it was about them. And they wanted to arrest Jesus and put him in jail. But intimidated by public opinion, they held back. Most people considered him to be a prophet of God. So what do you notice? What do you notice in that story? What stands out to you? Anybody want to offer anything back? All right, how about this? It appears to me to be like a cautionary tale. Maybe we could call it that, you know? Not sure that it has a clear and distinct moral, but it seems like an open-ended cautionary tale. And from your perspective, from reading it, what would you say the story is cautioning us about? What aspect of human nature? And there are no wrong answers here, and also very few rhetorical questions, so you can feel free to. Yeah. Yeah. So kind of like watch the expectation that if somebody's putting all the hard work in, they may feel like they should keep the fruits of their labor. And also, nobody's going to work as hard as you. What else?
Mercy triumphs over judgment.
Mercy triumphs over judgment.
These dudes just wanted to get in the game with the judging and ended up in the wrong game. They were the ones that got judged. What's that, two-sided, two-edged sword?
Yeah, this is like judge not lest ye be judged. Well, I've spent a fair amount of time with this story over the last couple of weeks, and I just made a little running tally of what I feel like this thing's cautioning us about. I feel like it's telling us about the consequences of assumptions, calculations, getting these little chess matches with each other, you know. It's a caution about the assumption of fair treatment and who gets to determine what's fair and what isn't. Feels like it's a story about economic imbalance. It seems to be a story about clinging, holding on tightly to something. Where does that feeling come from, that sort of needing to hold tightly to what I have? What undergirds that response? Yeah, fear of not having enough, scarcity. Somebody else getting what's yours, yeah. Yep. Sort of, yeah, there's a lack of trust. That's it. I feel like this is a particularly tricky one for us, just because of the time and place that we're growing up in. I mean, there's never been a society in the known history who prizes individualism more than here in this country, which has its upside. But of course, the downside is that it can be pretty difficult to become liberated or free from the feeling that if I'm going to make it in life, it's going to be because I made it. I made it happen. Nobody is going to do it for me. The upside of that is that, it's kind of true. It does take effort, focus, concentration. And the more we feel like somebody else should be doing it for us, the more bitter we become. There's a Anne Lamott line that I love where she says, expectations are just resentment under construction. So we've probably all done that by now, like, oh man, if only my teachers would have, or if only my parents would have, or if only somebody would have, and it's just kind of this little seed of bitterness grows. So that, yes, you got to pull yourself up by the bootstraps and make something out of your life, darn it. But that's a very challenging paradigm to experience the kind of trust that's only encountered when we come to the end of that and we come face to face with the fact that we can't actually acquire what we truly need by any of the means of acquisition that we grow up learning about. And that what we need is here. That what we need is here. It's just always so subtle and quiet. What we need, what we actually want is so layered over by all the things that we think that we want, that without stillness, without letting those calm jars, seen those? They have in elementary schools, help kids calm down. It's got a bunch of glitter in it. You shake it up, it all goes swirling, and you just wait for it to settle. And so this is the case of our interior reality too, that it's just such a swirl, unless we're mindful, that it becomes almost impossible to even know what's happening in here, let alone what it is I think I want, or how it is I can receive what it is that I actually need. Probably as a result of the rather intense moment that we're living in globally, I feel like what I noticed most about this story was, it feels to me like a cautionary tale about escalation, and how quickly things can escalate. and how it seems like both parties are moving towards like a mutually assured destruction. And the story kind of ends in this way. It doesn't really resolve neatly. It doesn't clean up. There isn't a clear moral, but kind of nobody walks away from this thing happy. So Roman law at the time stated that if a landowner had died and that there was no rightful heir to his property, then the tenants who maintained the property would have squatters' rights. So when the tenants of the property see that the son has come and not the landowner to check on affairs after they've run off the previous ones, their assumption, their sort of miscalculation, is that the landowner must be dead, because why would the son be coming to handle these affairs? So the outworking of that miscalculation is, well, if we kill this guy, we get to keep the place. But the landowner is alive still. And Roman law is pretty brutal, this Pax Romana. And the Roman Empire was committed to peace by any means necessary, sort of law and order. And Roman law was, in this case, like what would happen next, and everybody in Jesus' original audience would have known this, is that Roman law would have gotten involved, and the punishment for this crime would be crucifixion. So the landowner gets his revenge as the police come through and sweep these guys out of his property. And he gets his property back, but he's lost his heir, his son. And Jesus was a starving Galilean peasant. He was most likely homeless. He was well acquainted with the domination systems, what it meant to live in an occupied place, to be subjugated and felt under the thumb. He said, "Foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." And kind of miraculously, he drew large and diverse crowds, but his biggest following was among other sort of peasants, Galilean peasants. And in hearing this story, the folks in Jesus' position and those of his closest listeners, they'd have a hard time identifying with either party, because the wealthy landowner, he's in some economic stratosphere that they don't even have any, possible hope of understanding. But even the tenant farmers would be like upper middle class. And Jesus and most of those who are following him most closely, it seems, were kind of on the edge of survival, like the razor's edge of making it. And so here in this story would just be another instance of the funny games happening there at the top of these systems. What's the Rockefeller thing where somebody asked him, how much money's enough? And he said, remember this one? He said, just a little more. So this story seems to be primarily, at least for its first listeners, a sort of cautionary tale about the sort of pointlessness of accumulation. And my curiosity, and I wonder if you guys would care to take a shot at this, but if the story is primarily a commentary on economic issues, then why would the Pharisees take offense? Because they didn't really like this story. Why do you suppose that is? Yeah, so maybe the bridge there is that in the economic systems, the domination systems of the day, there was an obvious abuse of power that was recognized by, and here in the religious system, these guys are starting to sweat because they realize that the same game is playing itself out through them. Yeah. Yeah, there's a fear of losing their livelihood. Oh, man. Do you ever try to just climb into these stories and feel what it would feel like for these folks? I mean, I always read it in such a binary way. It was like Pharisees, bad guys. Jesus, good guy. Disciples, figuring it out, you know? And it was all so easy. And then you spend some time in these things and you think, well, Jesus, but like the only stuff we know about him when he was a kid was that he was always in the temple. And the Pharisees were the temple teachers, which means they were probably his pals and mentors, you know, not this like brood of vipers that appeared out of nowhere, riding in on horses from the west to give him a hard time. These would have been his friends and his mentors and his teachers. And as much as it's easy to minimize their opinion of him, I'm sure it was also pretty complex. You know that moment where you realize something's true, but you've been so committed to it being untrue that the cost of now trying to accept the truth of this different thing, you start to kind of, we've all come to those crossroads. And our minds are capable of incredible amounts of self-deception. You just read something yesterday, Jess. What was that? It was like once a new idea has taken root and grown, it's impossible to go back to an old way of thinking. But there's that moment right when the seed goes in the dirt, where it does seem that there's a little blip of time when we can sort of just try to pluck that out because of how uncomfortable it's going to be to begin to live in a new way. And I just feel like that's where these guys, they're at. And they, unfortunately, as the story goes, kind of double down on the old mode of seeing. And it has some pretty extreme consequences. And just spending time in this section of Matthew's gospel has been very sort of like sobering or somber for me. Just to see Jesus in this moment, because he's kind of just gone into this is the end of the road mode. Some of the harshest words that he has for anybody are spoken in this bit. And he's in Jerusalem. He's in the belly of the beast. He's been given multiple opportunities, even all the way up to the crucifixion, to just sort of like dial it down, you know, just take it down a notch. Maybe, like, what if we start with like 20% of that message and we'll work our way up, you know? And he just seems to have resigned himself to exactly what the cost will be to carry a message like this into the center of these systems. And just outside Jerusalem, as he began to enter with his disciples, he said this. He said, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and you stone those who've been sent to you. How often I've longed to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you weren't willing." You know that conventional wisdom that's like, choose your battles wisely? Or that's not a hill I'm willing to die on? Whatever this corruption in the system and whatever results and consequences it was having on the whole, Jesus seemed to identify this as the hill he was willing to die on. And And from here on is where a lot of the colorful terms get introduced, like brood of vipers and whitewashed tombs. You know this one? He says, you whitewashed tombs, clean on the outside, dead on the inside. Cups. If you clean the inside of the cup, the outside will be clean too. But if you spend all your time polishing the outside of the cup, he says to his followers, I think this is so interesting. He says, the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees, they're the official interpreters of the law of Moses. So he doesn't say, we got to throw these bums out. We elected the wrong people. He's kind of like, man, no, this is it. And he says, so seriously, listen to them, but don't follow their example. Just pay attention. They don't practice what they teach. And they crush people with unbearable religious demands, and they never lift a finger to ease the burden. Because everything's on the outside. It's all for show. And then straight to them he says, woe to you, religious leaders and temple teachers, for you had long ago been given the keys to the kingdom of heaven, but you were afraid to enter. And so instead you made it difficult for those who were already entering. He said, he goes, this is the Bible's not it's not a comedy. There aren't too many jokes. I want it to be funny because I like to laugh, but it's hard to, this is a pretty good joke, I think. He says, you travel halfway around the world to win one convert, and when you're finished with him, he's twice the child of hell that he was before you came to him. And it's really easy to kind of villainize the Pharisees, you know. I mean, but the only problem with that is that I've never actually, the only Pharisees I've ever met are the ones that like live in here. I've never been to Israel. Are there still Pharisees? I don't even know. The only ones I've ever met are the ones that live in here. And there are so many impulses that I understand from the inside, like this one that Jesus describes here. You go halfway around the world to earn one convert, this impulse, this desire to continue to push out and away from whatever it is in here that we don't feel ready or capable to look at. The funny thing about pushing out and away from this thing in here is that for me anyway, everything just starts to turn into a mirror at that point. And the further out I try to get, the more I'm reminded of what it is I'm trying to run from. And then finally turning to face the thing. I remember one time my family, we had a little health scare, and we got really freaked out, and somebody was praying for us and had like a picture, and the picture that she had was of like one of those like wiggly men, you know, those things on the side of the road that are like blowing to get you to come buy a new Kia or whatever. And that was her interpretation of fear. She's like, I feel like this is just hollow on the inside and it's just blowing, and if you didn't know what that was, you know, if you're a person from 400 years ago and you stumbled upon one of those in the forest, you'd probably be pretty scared of it. But upon closer inspection, you know, the emperor has no clothes. And it's just a wiggly man. The guy that started this church, Lee Brookins, he used to say, secrecy is the currency of evil. That's what he said. Secrecy. And I'm not entirely sure what he meant by that, but I have had the experience, as I'm sure many of you have as well, of finally unloading that thing that you held secret, that part of yourself that you hope nobody would ever see, that thing that you knew you could never tell anybody, that little bucket of shame secretly being carried around. And You know how it feels when it's been exposed, or when you've chosen to reveal it, or however it is that the thing that was hidden in the darkness comes into the light. And when that's met with grace and understanding, when that's met even with just this like gentle silence, how instantly the load lightens like it was never there. And it reminds me of what Jesus said, that picture of the mother hen where he's like, if you would just stop killing everyone I'm sending with an invitation, if you could just calm down and receive it and come home. He doesn't say how I'd long to finally have a chance to reprimand you with this ruler and whip you into shape. It's just grace. He said, I just want to gather your children together. Gather all the disparate parts of yourself and mother you and hold you. Even though that's the heart and the essence of the message that he's communicating, it does seem like he makes a conscious choice, Jesus does, at this phase of the story. That the gentle language of invitation doesn't seem to be working, and so he kind of goes into kamikaze mode here. And in an effort to break up the calluses that have formed around the heart of his religious tradition, he chooses some of the strongest language that he uses in the whole situation. You remember, there's one word that he keeps using over and over again. I wonder if you guys want to do a Sunday school style little Bible quiz. This word he's always leveling at the Pharisees. Yeah, he says, "Woe to you, Pharisees, you hypocrites." What's a hypocrite? Yeah, like two-faced. Yeah. We kind of the way that we use that word now is with the implication of sort of like professing one thing and then doing something different, or how it is that you're acting, living isn't matching up with the things that you're professing. That's actually like a recent definition. Sometime only in like the 1700s or so did that word begun to be used in that way. But it's not inaccurate. It's not off the point. A few weeks ago, Corey shared that hallelujah is the same word in all languages. Hypocrite actually comes to us sort of straight from the Greek, unchanged. That's why it doesn't sound like an English word, hypocrite. It's actually a Greek word. Hypocrite just means actor. And for some reason, our Bibles don't translate that word into actor. I don't know, they translated all the other Greek words, but they left that one, hypocrite. I'm not sure why. It's an interesting word. It means, hippo is under, and krino, the other root there, is to interpret. And so it translates directly to an interpreter from underneath, and that's because of the large masks that Greek stage players wore, so that audience members, even in the cheap seats, would be able to easily distinguish one character from another. So that if you're way up in the nosebleeds, you could remember that the guy with the big curly mustache is the bad guy, This is really interesting, though, to me. Because it's a mask. It's a fixed face. It's incapable of a variety of emotions and responses. It's incapable of nuance. It's just the character. And this seems to be the word that Jesus uses to most caution. That a hypocrite isn't a phony. there may not even be a functional understanding within ourselves that we're saying one thing and doing another. Have you ever had that little wake-up call when you realized you were doing that? A hypocrite in its sort of purest form just means the ingrained human capacity to be fused to a single perspective and given over to a certain pattern, and so lost in a role that we can't even tell we're acting. Yeah, how do you feel about that? Anybody have anything they'd like to contribute? I suppose it does. Huh. It's so interesting. Like, who cast you in that role, you know? How'd you get that part? Yeah, how did I get this part? Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Oh, that's good.
I think it's like hiding. Like, it reminds me, like, all the stories, and especially when you said hypocrite, it really hit me really hard. Because those people, they're hiding, keep hiding, I'm hiding.
Yeah.
Because I know where it's my authentic self. I think that's, to me, the whole overall message, is they keep hiding.
Yeah, it's hiding. Yeah. Yes. Which is why the gracious response is the one that heals us, because we're not wearing the mask because we're trying to be a bad boy, you know. It's all these safety and security systems developed unconsciously over a lifetime to just help us be seen and noticed and cared for. You notice where we have personality? It's also almost directly rooted in its Greek. It comes almost untranslated from the Greek as well. Personality comes from the Greek word persona. Persona means mask. It's actually the mask that the hypocrite wears. The personality. Mm. 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 Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. There's no better mirror than the people we're closest to. What's the thing you keep saying, Corey, about cleaning the mirror? How will the mirror be polished if we're irritated by every rub? I was reminded of one thing, and we'll kind of maybe wrap this up here. But like Misty was saying, maybe sort of acting is inevitable. It's not like we didn't do this on purpose. We're just sort of playing out the game that's happening through us and around us. And that's okay. It's the awareness that allows us to be free and to choose how we're going to inhabit the roles that we inhabit. The problem with these folks that Jesus was having was exactly what he said, where he said, you're given the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Like, it's kind of got an important part of this play. And but you are afraid to enter yourself. And so instead, you got busy making it difficult for those who are already entering. There's another verse right around here where he says, he goes, John the Baptist came very austere, and he was fasting, and you said something's wrong with him. And Jesus was like, I came sort of hanging out with and maybe having too much, all these reasons to judge me. And he said, that guy's got a demon. And he says, and then you saw the tax collectors and the prostitutes entering the kingdom, and you saw their lives being changed, and still you refuse to believe. This barrier that can't actually ever keep anybody out of anything. But it can cause a lot of undue pain and fracturedness and isolation and aloneness. And I would say if there's anything that, whatever it is we are currently, is an experiment on how aware we can be of the places where we're making difficulty for those who are already entering the kingdom. I have been Christianing pretty hard for a long time, and I'm grateful for it. It's been a great ride. But I have a series of memories, especially being a professional holy man, where I was kind of pressured, or mostly internally, but occasionally externally, to withhold certain sort of standards that barred people from this function or that one. And I'd have to have conversations with people who I could see in the light in their eyes that they were on a journey of transformation, and I knew that this conversation was not going to help, but you know what? You got to have some kind of standard. Otherwise, things are going to get out of control. There's a wild story. I'm going to close with this. There's a wild story in Mark's gospel, I believe. This Roman centurion comes to Jesus. You know that one? And he says, listen, my servant, my pious is the word, P-A-I-S, is sick. And I'm a person of authority, and I know that if you say the word, he'll be healed. All right, so a couple things going on here. Pious, generally, this is kind of, I don't know, earmuffs, but generally speaking, it can be translated as servant, but it means intimate servant. Rome back in the day, sort of like if you're a high-ranking person, you kind of got a young boy to be your partner, and that was just a part of the culture. The word most commonly used for that was this word. There's 2 or 3 other words that could be more readily translated as servant if you were talking about somebody that helped with the chores around the house. Okay, got that? So that's in there. Also, he's a Roman centurion. He's a member of a pagan religion and a ranking officer in the oppressing army. He comes to Jesus and he says, listen, my servant who I love is sick, and I know I'm a person who understands authority, and if you say the word, he'll be healed. And Jesus turns to him and says, go home, by your faith, your servant is healed. And then he turns to all the rest of them in the crowd, all his followers, all these Jewish folks, and he says, there's more faith in that guy than I found in all the lot of you. Go home, your servant's healed. And at least in that one instance, there was no call to repentance. There was no finagling, like definite moral issues, issues of morality that are happening here. There was no leave your life of sin and follow me. There are moments for those kind of calls. But what Jesus seemed to locate in that part of our mind would say is a most unlikely place was the light, the openness, the willingness, the surrender, whatever this is that brings us home. Yeah, Corey, you want to come up? I wrote this poem yesterday about a couple of things that I saw, and I can't shake the feeling that it's connected to what we're talking about, but I don't know how. So please interpret if you'd like. But I'm going to read this poem, and then Corey, if you want to play some tunes, and we still have 15 minutes together. But at the conclusion of this poem, you will be free to move about the cabin. You can use the remaining whatever's left however you'd like. You can sing along with the song. You can sit and reflect. You can talk or pray with those around you. You can pick your kids up, hang out. The communion elements will be available. You're welcome to take and eat. But yeah, here's a few things I saw yesterday. There's a little church. Cut off part of it. There was a long black hearse backed up to a little church. And on my way to work today, I briefly glimpsed the dirge of plumpy gals in floral skirts and old men wearing baggy suits, trudging along the well-worn path of the faithfully inert. Across the street and at a slant, the old Atlantic Theater sat. God's tattooed children came and went beneath a marbled sky. And David's weary baritone, which sounds like sadness finding home, which sounds like sadness at the door, reverberates inside. He sings he's buried daddy's faith. Christ can access him no more. The present plays his past for us, both now and evermore. Outside the door to the ticket booth, where I've been handing tickets out for God, sat a curly-haired girl, arms interlocked, with her boyfriend as he jawed. He'd been out late and fully seen at some church right here in town. He was flying high on prophecy. He was never coming down. Strangers had unmasked him with tongues made out of fire. He'd learned a brand new song to sing. He was a bird out on a wire. I only know this tank is empty because at one time I'd felt it full. I pulled the blinds to let the light in. Some darkness won't be swept out with a broom. Remembering that your dust and starlight leaves you venerated and confused. In truth, your life amounts to nothing, and yet this world was made for you. And God herself, the great allower, ends each day with a new bruise. She's only ever asked for nothing, and so she's never been refused. Yeah. So we got 12 minutes together. Oh, actually, the schedule's been completely erased, so anything could happen. But with whatever time we have together, please use it in the way that you feel would be most helpful for you at the moment.